We find ourselves in a moment of profound exhaustion, one I know many of us feel in our bodies and spirits. The cycles of crisis, political, environmental, and cultural, have left little room for reflection, for care, for the kind of spaciousness that allows us to imagine what could be otherwise. As Charlie Brown once sadly put it, "My idols are dead and my enemies are in power." His words carry the weight of despair, but they also remind us of the fierce, enduring necessity of building something more in the face of loss and powerlessness. Queer durations offer us a way to think beyond the crushing immediacy of our moment. They resist the tyranny of productivity, the endless rush to do, to win, to survive. Instead, they ask us to linger, to remember, to grieve, and to care. They also invite us to modulate and muster our resolve and go from a whisper to a scream. Philosophically, the concept of duration was invented to challenge the hegemony of empty and homogeneous time, making room for all the things that don't fit neatly into progress narratives, our defeats, our desires, our failures, our transgressions, our joys. Each of the artists on this panel engages with duration in ways that make a scene of occupation. Their works explore what it means to refuse to be mastered by the clock, to step through the looking glass, and to found temporary autonomous zones filled with what Billy Strayhorn might call distingué traces. They invite us to slow down, to sit with discomfort, and to find a speakeasy solidarity. They sing the weary blues, the blues of beauty and possibility in the in-between. And so, as we begin this conversation, I encourage us to think about how queer durations might serve as an anodyne for this moment of burnout. I want to ask the panel and everyone in this room how queer durations might help us honor our queer transcestors, sustain our safe and brave spaces, and dream beyond the limits of our current reality. Thank you for bringing your presence to this gathering. Let us begin. Rather than the customary introductions one by one, I want to try to interweave some themes that have emerged out of the practice of the artists, who I think are all here, yes, in the audience. Maybe actually this is the better moment to ask you to come up and be recognized so I could look at you. Please welcome the artists on the panel. I see Anh Vo, Dorian Wood, Shamara, Elliot Reed, Julie Tolentino. So, welcome.
Thank you.
Rather than the customary introductions one by one, I want to try to interweave some themes that have emerged out of your practice this weekend, linking them to the artistry, activism, and archiving of Julie Tolentino. Elliot Reed, your participatory performances and Julie Tolentino's durational pieces reframe time as a communal and shared resource. Dorian Wood, Shamara, Sebastian, Castro, Niculescu, you both use a collective and temporal act to carry queer futurity. Your work suggests that emotional labor, whether mourning or celebrating, is itself a durational gift. Anh Vo, Shamara, your intersection emerges in the ability to craft participatory temporalities, where audiences are not merely witnesses, but co-creators of meaning. Both of you, oh, that's the wrong one, sorry. Your practices address migration, both personal and ancestral, as a way to trouble linear temporalities. Queer durations in your work are shaped by overlapping and fragmented histories that include the atrocities of empire. Elliot and Shamara, your intersection emerges in the ability to craft participatory temporalities, where audiences are not merely witnesses, but co-creators of meaning. Both of you explore time not as a fixed sequence, but as a fluid and collaborative force. Julie and Eng, your practices intersect in their embodiment of care, using the body as a site to hold and challenge histories. And finally, Dorian and Julie, your shared focus on intimacy transforms vulnerability into a space for collective connection, expanding the emotional dimensions of queer time. Together, you all offer us a profound map of how queer durations can carry us through grief, joy, care, memory, and collaboration, reminding us that time is not only something we move through, but it's something we make. So let's give a final round of applause to these incredible artists for making time for this conversation. Okay, I'm almost off book. To start off, I'd like to ask each of you, in any order, to reflect on your own durational experiences. What has been your best durational experience, whether as an artist, an audience member, simply as a human being? You know, it could be a root canal, 12-hour flight. What has been your best durational experience, and what has been your worst, most challenging, or even unbearable one? Would anyone like to start?
Well, I guess as we're still cooking on our responses to your question, I just want to thank you for your really kind words. And it's so funny, I feel like I've just been indicted into some sort of intellectual polycule. So I'm not sure if we should pause for mutual consent before we continue. I've never felt closer to any of you than I have in this moment. Thank you, Tavia, for making this happen.
You're welcome. Best or worst durational experiences? Anyone pop to mind?
I mean, being alive is pretty fab. As a task, as a gift. There's this really interesting lecture I was listening to by Toni Morrison where she was talking about the relationship that she has with her son, or I guess had with her son, she's passed, but she was talking about dealing with frustrations with her own child and also her students, coming down to this idea of none of us asked to be here, right? Or sort of the things that are happening in the world are happening to us. But she pushed back against it and said in this interview, actually, I think that we did ask to be here. Because if you move past just the unfeelingness of just chance and circumstance, yeah, it's true that, we don't control what's happening in the larger world, but I think the way that she was accessing that was through a space of just spirituality. It's regardless of how you feel, there really is no reason why our sperm egg cell party explosion happened. It literally is a 1 in 10 million chance that we exist. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, it gives us even more of a reason to just fight for spaces. But I like what she said, because even though there's so many things I would change about this durational experience of living, I think it's a bit insincere to just lay back and decide that the world is only happening to you.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you for bringing the words of Toni Morrison into the room and the activity of choice of being, right, alive. It reminds me of an African proverb that states that you are who you spoke of before you came. This idea that we are actually actively present in the world, not out of randomness, but out of an intention that precedes us, and that we may not have access to. We may not fully ever know what those reasons were that we spoke before we came. So thank you for that. Life is the best and worst durational experience of Elliot Reed's life. Would anyone else like to offer a best or worst durational experience?
I think a lot of really echoing and interweaving with what Elliot said and what you said, Tavia, about like contextually being in life and vibing life as an endurance. I think, and also really echoing the talk of yesterday when we addressed chrononormativity. And I feel that there's something very, for lack of a better term in the universality of terms, queer in defying that, and how so many times within the endurance of life we lean into ancestral, transcestral energy to carry us through. But in doing so, we're not just taking from this other energy that we many times can't tangibly hold and see and perceive in the way that we do things that exist on this plane. I feel we regard them in a way that transcends how we endure this life, this plane, acknowledging that, yes, that there was something before the consciousness of where we are. There is something, after this, and how we navigate that information informs how we remain in this endurance. And in the otherness of what that endurance is too, which I feel is like life, as a negative, as a positive. I feel the otherness as well. It makes us special, but I feel it also deprives us of comforts that we dare wish for, that we dare strive for, and I firmly believe we deserve. And the fight in that we each have individually, that we have communally, and defying otherness, not as a way of removing, how special we are individually, but rather, in what we deserve and just basic comfort. I feel that every tide that we turn on our own communally informs less of a struggle for another generation as ancestors and transcestors in the making that we are. I firmly believe in going after what we deserve and never stopping at whatever semblance of comfort we have in this endurance of life.
Thank you. I wasn't here for the conversation on chrononormativity, but it definitely resonates. I resonate with what you're saying about how otherness is. Is there just as a kind of follow-up, unless someone else wants to jump in, is there a moment that maybe this is a best durational experience where you feel that otherness coming in with, or maybe was there a moment at this event? Julie?
Well, I was just going to maybe, okay, so I think, I'm just thinking of something you said, like this kind of daring to wish for. And I was thinking like, maybe there's something about, like something is going on that allows me to keep making work. And that is unbelievable. That was not supposed to happen. Like for sure, that was not supposed to happen. And I keep thinking like, so what creates that like ability for me to have the dare to keep doing it, to keep finding each other, to encourage other people to keep doing it, even though I've been out here, it's not cute sometimes, But I would say, like, I was thinking how the kinds of durations or these kinds of, I feel like duration is not, we're not just talking about this, I feel like we're talking about space making and the way that space and other people shape you. And I think of that through running the Click Club or sitting, in these places that we've been talking about that, relate to illness or to care in ways that really press on you. So I'm thinking more about like this sort of dare to like allow all of those things to keep shaping and reshaping, and then helping that you shape so that you can find a way to be in dialogue with somebody else who's very, very different from you, whose practice is so different from yours, but that there's a place to meet. Like there's some way that there's a place to meet. So in a way, I guess what I'm saying is, there's all this holding, there's this kind of daring, there's like a way to believe in like a pedagogy that is happening, that you're building and you're building and you're building. And there's something about that that just keeps, it just sort of keeps opening itself up while the whole world is pressing us. That's why all of this work is about pressure. A lot of the things that were happening in the class, in our classroom in the gallery, is about pressure, and also about just allowing yourself to make a shift. And just saying, I'm going with this radical moment of being in a class with all queer folks who are pushing on each other's intimate, can we do this outside of our girlfriends and boyfriends at this age? And, let's do that, because this is the only place we can do that. And we can also find out that we have limits, which is also useful, right? So anyway, I just want to say that, and I also just have to say that maybe one of the worst experiences, just to answer the question, get over with, is that there were many durational performances before I was making durational performance, of course, but I'm often the first in certain institutions, often the first in these institutions. So on one level, I sometimes want to say, I think even it was something that Adrian said that made me realize it is a value for me. It's I have been somehow creaking open some language or some doors, even if I'm not in art in the way that other, I'm not actually interested in that, producing this kind of artist thing. But it is really interesting for me, even though I'm not trying to turn over the institution, I am interested in fighting for it for us, and that's not a fun place to be, really. It can get me down. But what I also have to say is you fight for it, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I swear if you will just understand that if you adjust that, it will mean everything. They don't believe you, and then when you do it, they're like, oh my God. And I'm just like, fuck, that's a lot of my wasted time, not because I'm trying, that's that's exhausting time. So anyway, that adds to the fatigue.
Yeah, that's no doubt part of the burnout. It definitely makes me think of a quote from Fred Moten that, the university cannot bear what the subversive intellectual brings, right? There's an invitation, but it cannot bear, what you bring, right? But then when it's brought, they're like, oh, wow, thank you so much. That's amazing.
Like,
we really want that.
And now we do that, right?
What?
Then they take it.
Now
we do this. It's no, you actually don't, because
Yeah.
you're gonna actually keep hurting somebody until you learn the lesson.
Yeah.
But they hurt it. They hurt that opening all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that up, because I feel, coming from a lot of punk alternative spaces, as a younger person too, I think that a lot of people put too much belief in this notion of anarchism, because I'm trying to be really careful in the way that I say this. I also don't believe in the way that the institution exists, but at the same time, it's I can't fucking farm. It's be for fucking real. It's you're wearing shoes. What do you mean you want the state to collapse? No, you don't. Who makes your medicine? Are you dumb? So it's yeah, things definitely need to change, but it's just I think this is where a politic of subversion is actually more useful than being close your eyes and plug your ears. It's not right. There needs to be change, but the state needs to be restructured. But unfortunately, in this day and age, I don't think that people would be able to take advantage of actual anarchism in the truest sense of the word. Which, if 20-year-old could hear me speak now, they'd probably want to fight. But it's true. It's I took a train here. I was born in a hospital. It's silly, but it's true, and I think it's important to remember that it's do you know what? We are direct beneficiaries of all of the intellectual achievements that our ancestors have brought, and it doesn't mean that we need to be taken advantage of, but I think there needs to be more, subdued subversives and subversive kind of intelligent ways of thinking about what it actually means to restructure living as a contemporary person.
Shamara, can I bring you in on this? Just because the performance that I saw and heard yesterday seemed to be staging, this question of what the institution can bear. And if I might out you as a graduate of Brown, I believe, right?
Yeah,
And now returning, you know, as an artist in your own right.
Yeah.
Just sort of like how you have, I know, it's sort of, you need a trigger warning for that. No, but like you're coming, it's a homecoming for you, right? Or is it, right? And also, what have you learned in terms of how to bring drone intensity, strobe light effects, et cetera, push the institution and yourselves and your audience, maybe to keep it even cuter, right? Like, is there a difference, you know, in what you can do here and versus like a squat somewhere else or somewhere outside the university in terms of the actual performance that we saw?
Yeah. It's funny, you're also outing me as a squatter, too.
Well,
yeah. There are many outings to be made, I think, in my work. And I think, actually, the question you asked about the durational component, I think, relates to this, because I think where I feel the work I'm currently making comes from is, you know, like when we were setting up the piece, it was very much a practice of a question of like, what will they let us do? What will they bear? And how, you know, when I was working with a lighting tech, being like, I want the lights to move onto the audience and blind them. And just like the cognitive dissonance of like, how? But how are they going to see and know? And like, I don't want them to see and know. I think something that I'm thinking about with that is also that so often my best and worst experiences of duration have to do with a kind of temporal stretching or pressing that exists within the framework of what could be an hour, what could be a year, but is not tied to duration in the way that we're still continually understanding it as a linear temporality, as in like, I'm gonna do a 16-hour performance and that's duration. An hour-long performance, that hour-long performance was an endurance performance. And I think so often the framework of an hour returns so often to me because it's like the basic framework for the labor, for the workday, for this schedule that we exist in that I've had such a hard time returning to. I think the homecoming aspect of is especially strange because I think like, you know, yeah, the alumni returning is usually like, oh, I get to come back and share, yes, I'm doing all of this, I'm doing all of that, but I'm coming back to share a work that comes from about 5 years of survival, sex work, homelessness, and struggle since I graduated, you know? I have an Ivy League degree and I've tried to push it as best as I could and no one wants to give a brown trans lady a job. And it's quite as simple as that, you know? And that's something that persists consistently. And I had to learn at one point that like a meritocratic academic validation will not transcend my body and what it does in a place. And I think learning that was one of the strongest moments when I realized the performance I do is actually about that. What can you do within the space you're given when you are only given access to spaces in these tangential or kind of oblique ways. And so, you know, I think about the framework of an hour, and I think it's really funny because, again, when we were talking about a duration performance, I was like, this is an evening length piece, and it was almost like, oh, like, evening like that's so normative. That's so, but at the same time, it is and it isn't for me because the best and worst experiences of an hour that I've had have been as a hooker. And it's like the time frame of an hour is actually the framework for the entire interaction that we're having. The introduction, the intimacy, the end, it's all happening within that. And you know, there's body knowledge in that is so much deeper than institutional knowledge, that goes so much deeper, that has to do with like, I'm gonna put this song on this playlist at 45 minutes so I know that I have to make them come soon. And so it can be over. Or, oh, I just have to get through this hour, I'll let this happen, and I'm just gonna think about what I'm gonna have for dinner. Like, it's not so much about the duration itself, but the gap between your body and the duration that you're being forced into, as whether for survival, for futurity, for whatever. Like, for me, it's less about like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do an hour-long performance, but more so like, this is setting the frame for me to bring the timeline of my own body into it, and that exists outside of an hour, a year, a century. That is something that exists as flesh, that doesn't only transcend time, but it quite literally does not fit into it. And I think that's where I'm really interested in starting. Because I think when we're talking about chrononormativity, about the normativity of time, we're talking so much about capitalism, the workday, colonialism. We're talking about how those things have set up a structure that makes it so that we're constantly either fighting not to die or slowly dying, you know? And I think those experiences are where the most intense, beautiful, and inspirational experiences of radicalism, of militancy, of extremism, of anarchism, I'm so sorry. But that's where those come from, and that's where I'm really interested in exploring things, because again, I think it's a matter of, you know, what, maybe returning to the anarchism question is like, what do we have that exists from a structure that is killing us, but then at the same time, what exists within that structure that we can take for ourselves to continue surviving? And I think that's the kind of work I'm
Okay,
most-
but
yeah.
that's the thing. You can't take something unless someone else made it.
Yes, but you can make things yourself at the same time, and not everyone always had a hospital to get born into. Not everyone.
That's
yeah.
true. But
and these
also,
are
like,
things
you're
that we're.
I'm just saying that, like, I feel like maybe we're arguing for like an extremism.
Yeah.
But I'm like, maybe my interpretation of anarchism is like hyper literal.
I think it's like the classic farm worker anarchism, which there are many different kinds of. But I do think there, and like in my heart, I'm more a communist than an anarchist.
Yeah.
So I do believe in structure too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even, you know, like
Yeah.
cooking for each other. You know, it's like
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with like
But
commerce. Like,
capitalism
the village
didn't
model.
give us cooking to each other.
I totally agree,
Yeah.
and I just think there's just like some missing nuance, which it maybe sounds like you have, but and a lot of people will like kind of lazily throw.
No,
around
I hear you.
anarchism is,
I mean, white queers in the punk scene love that
a
shit.
nightmare.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we're really talking
Yeah.
about. Yeah.
Yeah, jump scare.
Yeah. Oh,
So-
yeah, exactly.
I want this conversation, all of it, and I want to both kind of acknowledge and reflect the difficult conversation, Shamar, you brought into onto the table. You know, in part by talking about life after college. I'm just situating us at a college, you know, and in this sort of pedagogy, and you know, there's so, as a college teacher, you know, we're often told or we're confronted with this sort of mandate to produce, you know, chrononormative, you know, productive students, right? You know, I'm sure, you know, like majors that I just had a friend who's having a meltdown because her son is graduating Wesleyan with a major in devised theater, you know? And I'm like, well, I mean, it is the end of the world, so maybe devised theater is the best major to have, you know? Like, do you really want him majoring in, like, STEM, you know? But I don't know if that guy won that argument. Working in whatever capacity, you know, is something that seems to not really transcend, but subtend the communism, anarchism debate in squat spaces, alternative spaces, nightlife. So I just wanted to reflect that, but I want to shift a little bit, and maybe Eng, to invite you to redirect by offering us your best or worst durational experience. If the worst one is this conversation, that's fine too, but, you know, just to invite you to say a few words.
I'll probably say something and hopefully along the right answer or sort of not answer that question. I also feel compelled to like out myself that I also went to Brown and also graduated, made performances, and both times I performed here, one when I was a student and here now, I ran into so much trouble with the power that be, even though there's so much support as I was a student and even now coming back as an alum, and I don't even know who support me really. I just could feel it. And I'm like not trying to gossip, but like,
Please.
no, like there's something about how I feel like early on I was much more in this like rebel, provocateur, and was thinking about how can I disrupt the institution and all of that stuff. But now I relaxed. I got sick. I'm just being. I'm just out here trying to make my work, and in some ways it has produced some way more tangible disruption when I don't try to, when I'm just being. And like I go to this symposium and I'm not trying to disrupt Brown at all. I'm like bringing my practice the way it is, and it's just freaks people out because it doesn't, like things are out of my control a lot of times. I set up some parameters and who knows, Jesus take the wheel and things happen. And they don't like that. And I remember having a production meeting with like 12 people, and I'm like, what? Who needs to be here? No, or like I remember doing this performance at the kitchen of American Academy of Arts and Letters and having like 10 boiling pots of water, and they like freaked out too, but they didn't even know why. And then afterwards, somebody told me that I broke all the track lighting from the steam. And that for me was like such an embodiment of how I imagine my relationship with institution. Like I'm just
Vapor.
yeah, I'm just kind of there permeating it and kind of seeing what haunts the space, and then things just break down. Like I don't do anything. And I think that to me is also like this more peaceful way of making work of being, where I don't feel like I'm fighting the cause. Like I'm just here, like being with the people I want to be with, and trying to sustain and just do what like this thing wants to do.
Oh, sorry. I mean, it just reminds me of, you know, it was something that we talked about on the first night where, you know, there's an over-management. Like, that's what we're dealing with. It's not our work. Like, the work isn't so wild. I mean, it's wild. Everybody's making really intense, important. We're breaking open our own edges, right? But the idea of like out of control is when you don't know. And then but everybody teaches that in their classroom. Do you know what I mean? Like, so that's what I don't appreciate is like, it's like the language gets to be wide and then the whole thing like slams down. And I think that the protection of they're protecting the building, they're protecting the job, the protection part, you know, it's like we're protecting our understanding of ourselves, our community, the experience that we have, the reasons that who we're trying to reach. So it's sort of, I think it's like this fight for the right protection. And I get bored by the censorship bullshit, like whatever, censorship, like everything, right? We've been fighting that one for too long. And so, like, let's not have that conversation, but let's have the one that's like, oh God, I realize, it's about my language, it's about my body language, it's like, can you trust me? And so then we just start building this other body that's like, yeah, I'll be hard because I need to have what I need, but at the same time, I'm just gonna be like, if you don't wanna take this chance, I'm probably gonna do it anyway, right? Like I already am doing it, right? Like I'm cutting and bleeding all over the fucking place, but nobody knows. Right. At least the people that need to know, right? And so, like, I don't know, like it's okay to be an uncontainable being and an untamable one, these ungovernables. Like these are the places that we actually function. And that's very valuable because we take that on. So there's so much responsibility to be that person. So I just want to say that is a good thing to support. Like that's the thing that we want supported, but not in just like institutional support. I don't need an extra cup of coffee and like some extra apples that I don't eat. Like I like don't put the Rice Krispie treats in my thing. You know what I mean? Just give me some space, keep the space warm. You know what I mean? Like make sure that I have extra chargers. Don't make me feel bad for asking for things. You know, like I think that's maybe a little space to be.
absolutely. Yeah, and money too.
Oh, money's good.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, money's good.
Yeah,
Elliot, I
honestly,
wanna-
like no, like and like completely real way, like the amount of like psychological dissonance I have to navigate as a performer, where it's like being someone who is engaged in like critical practice, like we all are here, and thinking about like, wow, it's like my body is being transported around the world as like a good and service, and it's a bit weird, like to go to all these shows that are like publicized and like, you know, we'll see our faces, we'll see our names, and like I'm in 6 months of production meetings, like from people that are all on salary. I'm not talking about Brown specifically, but it's just like my life as a professional artist. I'm just like, it's
Everywhere.
so crazy
Yeah,
about like
everywhere.
how I am forced to navigate hearing about how tens of thousands of dollars are switching hands on my behalf, but none of it actually comes to me. And
Yeah.
so like by the end of it, if I get a check, it's like I, you know, like early 30s, I like have a roommate and a cat and like live in New York, and like one artist fee can like pay 1 month of rent and like half of my phone bill. But that's like 6 months of like invisible labor. So it's like every phone call, every Zoom meeting, every party, every conversation, which is like, unfortunately, like I love what I do and I do love people, but I think it's really important to acknowledge the sort of like psychological terror of just like being aware of yeah, just getting like literally like passed around and sort of like not having a proxy of like a painting or like a book, but it's just like, oh no, it's like it's my body that's on the menu, which we all think about as performers, but like that plus just the reality of just like needing to live, it's like pretty consuming. And there's this thing where it's just like, yeah, being seen is not food, like that's not a check, like being popular doesn't pay a bill. And so it's like, yeah, every day I get better at articulating for like where the gap is and what my needs are, but it's something that's like really felt as a performer.
But being popular isn't a value, right? I mean, I know you know that, but
Yeah.
like, it really is, I mean, we know that that there's nothing about that. But,
Yeah.
You know? I mean, we're on each other's tongue. Like, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
On that level, I think. Like, I just need to know that you, like, there's certain people that I want to be in dialogue with.
Yeah.
That I'm sometimes
Same.
far from. You know, like I'm sometimes really far from.
There's something in here about like metered togetherness, right? That like we're always like on the meter, not just on the clock, but on the meter. When Shamari talked about like the hour is like the client's hour, right? You know, some of us probably know the psychoanalytic 45-minute hour, right? You know, there's different kinds of like attention, economies, and scenes of exploitation and extraction, and also, to quote Aretha Franklin, who's zooming who, like you don't know. But Elliot, I wanted to linger a little in your experience at Brown because I saw your performance yesterday, and one of the things that was really impressive to me was how you were able to make a evening-length performance as on a group of student dancer performers in 3 days, I believe, and then you said in our conversation, now it makes sense, 15 hours of work, right? It was really remarkable what you accomplished. It's partly just a compliment of it, in that, I was really feeling, are there any dancers in the room? Anyone of, okay. No, sorry, of Elliot's.
There they are. It's
So,
you.
You're I understand, So, like, you can come at me later, but I was, like, interpreting, I was receiving the first 5 minutes of the piece as, like, baby steps. Baby steps. And then, you come at me,
You're
like,
literally finishing your thought.
yeah, no, I'm finishing thought, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like baby steps, and then your like didactic or your pedagogic was a kind of classic Elliot word salad parody of like the scene of instruction, right? Where you kind of derail us and take us into this totally other zany place, right? Which is quite liberating, right? Because then you set a template for them to then come in with a kind of scripted, and then by the end, totally devised, improvised, like engaging the audience. That's work, I want to name that, that's skill. So, like that's worth a lot, and I'm sure it took 6 months or longer to set up,
years,
but it's also compressed in a certain way. So, how do you get both just respond to that interpretation, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sex work of it all. It's sort of like, I have my own goals within the projects, but it's through training and experience to sort of be like, I developed the ability to sort of like fracture like my experience of everyone I'm sharing a room with, and like figuring out how to just like make little adjustments and like how I communicate to a person, because it's like I try not to talk to people the way that I wouldn't want to be talked to, which is like a demand. It's like you can be firm, but it's like a good example. It's like I like really try to like work a lot with like praise, and sort of like I would rather hold space for like openness or use language to sort of like figure out how to get to an end game through the back door rather than like do this. And I think like that kind of like emotional relationality or like labor is like similar to sort of like working retail, like whether it's like selling yourself, selling an object. It's sort of like figuring like, okay, there's you, me, and a vector that's in between, and in this case it's like me, the performers, and like the object, which is like the final piece. And so it's like, how do I have to modulate and modify my behavior in order to like hold space for all the potentiality while also kind of like top from the bottom, I guess. That makes sense? It's like
It does, but it worked. That's kind of I'm trying to naming, and please corroborate those who are in the room to see, like it really worked. It was a great performance.
Thank you. Yay.
Dorian, your performance, which we'll see tonight, you restaging your concert of a tribute concert to Sinead O'Connor. And we've had a conversation. I maybe have been here one too many times with my intense fandom of Sinead, our mutual. So, Sinead was someone who achieved global fame. A rebel heart that achieved global fame and therefore was able to monetize popularity or something like that. But it was not in a way that helped her, right? Like really. She endured queerly, and not to overuse the word tragic, but like so many tragedies befell her, right, as an artist in the very last years of her life. The music is this alchemization of her loss and her grief and her rage, right, and also her identification with, I guess I would say specifically our conversation has a little bit about her affinity for Rastafarianism, which is contested and interesting to think about as a, white Irish lady, but real, and in some ways too, right? To take this second album of hers on the road, is it an homage? Clearly it's an homage, but like, what does that mean to kind of receive that work on your body as the artist you are now?
I think so much of it is really.
Sorry. Can I just say one more thing? It's like a year. There was like an anniversary of her death that then became a kind of an occasion for some, maybe yourself, to.
Right. So
Yeah.
it was debuted at Joe's Pub in New York on July 26th, on the 1-year anniversary of her passing, and as many of the works of we who create, it comes from a place of processing pain. And I had this idea as a way of like the ongoing processing of the grief of of her passing and the passing of many loved ones. I dared play this album from beginning to end on voice and piano, which I had never done before, and yet through high school it put me through the endurance of high school. And as an experiment, I played it at Joe's Pub, and I emerged mostly unscathed from that. And it's hard. It is a very hard project because it is so vividly addressing the transgressing back to when I was an adolescent, taking that pain, transporting it to modern day pain, compressing all of that time into this one chunk of pain that is now purposed as a way to hold space so everyone else can bring their own pain and project and share and acknowledge pain. And I am exhausted. I am tired of pain. And I feel that the only moments in which we are invited into institutions to present work is when pain is
On
the
menu.
star. Pain is, on the marquee in glittering lights. And based on who we, what we look like, institutions want to know how that is associated with this popular pain that will embiggen an institution because they looked in our direction and saw this pain that has nothing to do with who we are as an individual. Sinead O'Connor, her entire life battled that, and yet, when she decided to vocalize that, verbalize that, embody it, the world came for her because they were not prepared, and that was people, of all backgrounds were completely taken off guard. And to this day, she has not gotten the recognition, the justice that she deserves. And yet, those of us who are still here on this plane are expected to continue showcasing our pain for profit that is not ours. Because I don't believe that we truly profit from our pain. We really don't. And it's exhausting. And really going back to the conversation of systems and whether we need them or not, to me, we've always had systems. It's been the thievery of the systems that we created, that our ancestors and transcestors created, that were stolen by white supremacy, that were stolen by colonialism, and has made us hate these systems for what they've become. Because they are nothing but factories for regurgitated pain, for their entertainment, for their own purpose. In these systems, these semblances of systems that were put into place to protect us and nurture us and nourish us, we're here begging for the scraps of systems that we recognize as being from a time beyond this plane, but the people, the liberated beings that we are, we recognize this, and it hurts us, and that becomes part of the work, and it becomes, just swept under the rug of what our work is, and we're constantly fighting to make sure that even that is seen, knowing that whatever work we put forward in this moment is still not enough to acknowledge the mass thievery of these systems and how we're still grateful and we apologize for too much. We ask for very, very strategically for what we deserve. And I am tired of this because that is associated to my own pain, that is associated to the channeling of pain, to the holding space for pain, and I just would love more of an emphasis, more of a spotlight on the fucking thievery of all of this.
I want to jump on that if I may, because I think something I'm thinking about also with the institutional conversation, with having been through this institution in various embodiments, I want to make very clear that when we talk about privilege, when we talk about academic privilege, when we talk about these spaces that are heavily intellectual, these spaces that exist as flows for capital, truly. That's what an institution is. And especially in this current day, the institution is actually a stock market tactic. The academy is an investing tactic. It is not what it proposes itself to be anymore, and it never was. But I think something that is so huge about the mass thievery is also that it's happening now and every single moment we're here. It's been happening, and it happens to such an extent that it's not that privilege gets one outside of the world of pain. Privilege is what causes pain. Like, the mass thievery of a people's, of their life force, that is the pain. And it is not that we're reflecting on some past moment of colonialism, we're constantly living through it. Palestine is almost gone. Like, we're here right now talking about this, but at the same time, AIPAC, many other institutional powers that are invested in the death of the Palestinian people are right here with us, like right next to us, a block away. Like, I think what we don't recognize is actually, we always talk about the institution. Is it good? Is it bad? I have no interest in the morality of a politics. I have the interest in a political analysis that shows us this institution exists not because of some past trouble, because it is constantly regurgitating the profit it makes off of the pain and the exploitation of the world, of the global south, of the local downtown community, of the people who live here and have to work here but do not get to actually survive. Like, it's not merely that we're talking in some metaphorical way about the institution. The institution does that. It is hoarding wealth right now from people, from all of us that don't have it. And we're here to get a little bit of money so I can go home and like maybe try to find an apartment that I can't afford. But like, we're here out of need, but in no way do I have any filiality to the institution. In no way do I have any filiality to the degree I got. You know, it's a privilege, of course, but I have no filiality to the institution. I want it to burn, and I think it should. And I think, in fact, the daring that I'm interested in is the daring to continually be extreme, and the daring to actually say, what if we did burn this down? What happens next? Like, to actually go there and be like, okay, but if we were actually able to destroy the systems that are constantly trying to kill us and our siblings, what do we do after that? I'm interested in going there because I think so often we're found in a compromise in this kind of half liberal, half radical posture that we have to adopt when we're in the institution. And I'm not interested in that. I have no filiality to queer. I have no filiality to transgender as words, as concepts. In my own experience, queer is, in fact, the history of the colonization of a people and their ways in an institutional setting that allows people who do not belong to that community to profit off that community.
When you say filiality,
Yeah.
no, go in.
Yeah.
I mean, just like when you say filiality, just, what do you mean?
I don't understand myself as queer. I don't understand myself as transgender. The biggest part of where I'm approaching my work is that I am a tranny. And that is a very different thing.
So
That
that's
is-
like identity, though. But what about filiality?
Like, I don't believe a queer politics actually exists. I have like reached a deeply nihilistic view of this that I think is actually a practical view, which is to say that the history of queer and its emergence is a history of white people claiming that to advance profit incentives. It's not the history of what Marsha and Sylvia were doing, because they don't give a shit about that work.
Right.
They're just doing it. They're living it. Like,
So
they are.
you have an affiliation. They are your
Yeah. And
affiliated, chosen ancestors, is
But-
what you're saying.
in the sense of, like, they're not my transcestors.
But they're not your transcestors, but they
They're-
are your...
Well, they are, they are in the way of spirits that guide someone, of orishas, of, like, it's in the way that people that have lived continue to live through the people that they touched. And I'm very lucky to know people, to have people in my family that knew Sylvia and Marsha. And, like, in that way, they're still alive to me. And it's not so much about, like, connecting them to them through some fabricated idea of transgenderism. It's actually connecting to them as street queens, as transvestites, as trannies, as the most abject part of them, as the homeless drug users that they actually were. and that they had no interest in not being anymore. Like, I think so often, like, the politics of trans and queer is to fix something that feels innately wrong in so many ways, where I'm actually interested in, like, you know, I believe at some point, Julie, maybe you mentioned something about, like, something about okayness, or we're trying to, like, make something okay while we're here. I'm interested in not being okay.
No,
I'm interested in being worse.
I think that
Yeah.
that spirit is like I'm with you.
Yeah.
But I also am gonna say, like, in that kind of filial and practical, that there's, like, for some of us who do not come up through an institution like this, right? And this is like, you know, I'm gonna bring this up always, that it's not that you end up having to learn like 14 languages. And you have to comport yourself or decomport yourself constantly. So it's a kind of a building and a breaking and a building and a breaking, which, you know, I think what you're talking about in a lot of ways is like something I care about very much, like this kind of ruin. Like it is a necessity for what we're doing, so that we're not doing that comportment that's kind of continuing to let this thing keep happening. So I really appreciate that. But I also have to say that when I am in this place, I'm not just thinking about, I'm thinking about these things about me, whatever me, but I'm also here to teach. You know, like, I'm 100, getting my first job. Like, that's crazy. You know, I've been teaching for a million years. I had to go back to school to, like, teach. You know, so those are the systems. You know, like, I'm tired from this time together, but I'm tired right this minute because it's hard. I'm sorry I'm crying. I'm not crying because I'm sad. I'm crying because when I have a hard time talking, this is what happens. So as much as I understand the fight, there's another kind of fight. And so the thing that we could fight for are, like, these students who were doing fucking nothing. You know, they were wasting your time in that gallery. They were finding an object or a space or a person or a glare to make meaning. And so, like, do I have an obligation to that? Yeah. Like, I understand, but how do you take that, like, ruin and still, you know, like, it's just a little door, and it's not about giving them joy. It's not about having, like, a theatrical experience. It's sort of like, okay, queer's a shitty word, you know? But it's the one that makes it so that it's recognizable, so that we can at least open it up in places where maybe it's not, you know, there's a lot of us who don't come from this. There's a lot who don't come from a language of words or some kind of structure that lets you know that you can break through, like, some difficulty. So I don't know, I get frustrated. Like, I think, like, I just want to I know everybody is here and smart and great, but that's not why. We're not just speaking to the converted. Like, we're trying to do something. And, you know, it's like to waste an audience's time. Let's just call it that for a minute. Like, our performances that are too long or too short or too loud or too whatever, too not naked, whatever. Like, those are the moments where we remember that we don't have, like, it's also when you remember and you feel how ruled you are. Is when you're being wasted a little bit. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to remind us while we're, like, it's so easy to, like, be, like, to give it. But I also know that, like, when we are listening to you tonight, we're gonna dissolve a bit into something. Like, and that is the thing that keeps this going. And it doesn't pay our rent, but it's gonna pay our rent if we keep working hard, like, if we keep taking that spirit, you know?
Absolutely, but there's even, I I appreciate that, and I appreciate, like, this is, I feel some, like, it is at the root of, like, you know, of us really, like, you know, being present and witnessing each other and being aware of each other, and in doing so, and, you know, embracing certain terms, decrying all terms. To me, like, it really just, I can't help but feel that as we are all in this room, there is a watchful eye who is laughing at us, who is marginalizing us over and over and over again, and they want us to throw terms around. They want us to call each other this or that, to decry certain terminologies, to embrace other ones, because they do not give a shit. All they want us to do is to remain marginalized. So to me, part of the work, yes, is holding space. It's creating, holding, sharing space through work, through expressing pain, sharing pain, welcoming pain, acknowledging that there is pain, and knowing that there is an extraordinary healing value in that. But I can't help but see beyond this, what we deserve.
Can I ask a question on that then? To you and to anyone, actually no one's on the spot. Do we need territory?
I mean, we are territory.
No, but do we need land?
Do we need, I mean, well, I don't see, the thing is, the whole need aspect of it to me is, I mean, who are we to really ask? I mean, to me,
So we're like, that's a no? I guess we don't need
well,
land.
no, it's the whole, like necessity of it. Like, we don't know, like, when we wake up in the morning what we're going to need in that moment, other than just being present.
Okay.
And, we, like, the body asks us, for air.
Yeah.
Every waking moment, the body's asking us for air.
Okay.
The body's asking us for, for nutrients that we do our best to give, and what we need at any moment, if land is a part of that, I feel again, if this is just addressing, that yes, the land has been stolen, a time and time and again, land is continuously stolen here, land is stolen thousands of miles away, we're presencing this ongoing marginalization that hardly anyone on the grand scale is addressing. Why? Why all of a sudden is it okay for us to keep bringing pain, from the selves over and over for some sort of, cultural stimulation when, again, as we're discussing all of these things, Palestine is disappearing, and not just on the Gaza Strip, but everywhere. They're coming for Palestinians everywhere in this world. They're coming for trans people. We can go into the details of identity, but they're coming for everyone. Everyone, the global majority. They're coming for the global majority, and to me, that is the emphasis that we can't underline and highlight and put up on a marquee enough.
Right.
The fucking marginalization.
Yeah.
I don't particularly like queer like myself, and I use it, as a need, in a very, talking about endurance, in the span of 10 seconds, 20 seconds, to communicate my kind of marginalization that is recognizable on a much larger scale, but nobody knows who I am. I'm still figuring that out on my own, and the thing is, we don't have to know, we have a right to not have to know. And this is, to me, the whole point of it is that, why do we need to keep justifying who we are? Never for our own benefit, only barely for our own survival.
Yeah, I feel is land important? Yes, and I feel like something I really love
Yes, we need
about
territory?
Yes, and also I don't really know how valuable it is to try and play devil's avocado in this situation, because it's what these two lovely people on my side brought up, and also there is a precedent for alternative ways of sharing space, and just the totally most base pedantic side is human are animals, but then also if you go back to the notion of a village, or just if you don't want to oversimplify what labor actually is, it's if I'm cooking dinner at my house and have you over, it's because I love you, I want to feed you, and the exchange that we're having isn't an exchange of labor and by extension commerce and privilege or whatever else, but also it's the thing that I'm getting back, whether it's care, support, visibility, or nothing at all, is still of value, but that can't happen without land. So I don't necessarily think you're trying to open up the space to talk about people deserve to have things. What those things are can perpetually be up for debate, but I think that you can acknowledge that it's not working without, and also I can only speak for myself, strongly believe that ownership is a right. What ownership is, not ownership or dominion over another, but I can own the love I have for my friends, I can own my desire to make work, I can own my intellect, my want to read, my these are things that I have, that are choices that are sort of like outside the limits of just purchasing and like dominion of the other.
I mean, one thing I just want to say, because I mean, I just love what you're saying, but I just also just have to say, like, that coming for you is already built in us, right? So, like, that's what I'm worried about the most, is that we're, like, there's a police in there, and that's maybe what, you know, this kind of durational, whatever, we need to study durational performance, for sure. It's different than performance, okay? So I just think that's really important, but there's something to be said about, like, when you let this kind of waste or this kind of whatever concentrated, compressed time, that's when you feel what's happening. Like that's when you're like, oh, this is my police or whatever. And so it's, you know, I don't know. I've been doing it a really long time. I'm still fucked up. Like, I still do bad things, you know. I buy stupid shit, you know. But I'm trying, like, I'm trying other things too. So I'm just wondering if, like, that real estate is like something that's in here that's has to be like reorganized somehow, maybe.
Yeah, it's just Justin Bond says, my body is my economy. Definitely resonate with that. You wanted to...
I just wanted to say something quick, which is like, I think also the question of land is different. Like, land is a very specific formulation of space, but I think we really just need space.
What about territory?
Yeah. Territory is also
territory?
a very specific formulation, and it has attachments to ideas of the nation state and things that I think it has, but like space at its heart is about having, like, quite literally room to breathe, quite literally room to do a thing where you can just like play around. And I think so much of what brought me here and what I want to say specifically about my performance is that, like, the intellectual tradition, if I want to call it that, which it is, that I really have learned the most from is actually DIY noise punks. And we make things happen in the span of 30 minutes and a performance happens. Like, my collaborators, like, who are incredible performers in their own right, like Lucy and Adonis and Exit Seraphim, my partner Levi, like, we're actually, like, outside of an institutional structure. We're making it happen all the time. And we were having these conversations about, like, you know, for them and in a different way for me, like, that knowledge and that power of knowing how to make a show happen in an hour in an alleyway somewhere is like a level of, like, knowledge of producing performance, producing events, and producing art that is so rich and at the same time so not valued by the people who are here that are like, when do I do this? What cue is this? When do I, like, they are different languages, but there's something that happens when, like, you get a bunch of freaks together in a room where they actually have space and magic happens. And I think the part of the equation that is just so clear to me is space, because I think, you know, many of us are living or are in transit through New York in many ways, and that's a very important place for me. It's where I'm from. It's also a place that is being deeply, deeply gentrified to an extent that is appalling at this point. I'm not only homeless, almost everyone I know is homeless. It's to a point, I think, and to a point of intensity that space is the commodity that we're constantly not being given access to, but at the same time, the main thing that brought me here was space. It was like, oh, we have a room to do something, and someone's not going to call the cops if we make noise at 9 p.m. Hopefully, who knows?
Right.
Like, oh, I'm being contracted to be here to, like, do these things, and if I say it's noise and that's part of the performance, then they have to, in some form, accept that. In New York, if we try to, you can't even throw a show anymore because every neighborhood has some white bitch calling the cops at 8 p.m. saying, shut this down. And, like, there is quite literally no space to breathe in New York anymore. No space to live, no space to even make truly radical art in a way that does not exist in an institution like this, or an institution with donors and a board of trustees. Like, there is one DIY space left in Brooklyn that almost everyone I know books in, and we all
Don't say the word.
Yeah, no, and we all hate it, and we all hate it because it's
Don't
the
go
only
to there.
space-
Don't go to that one space.
But like, it's the only space we have access to, and that is so. That space is so charged and it's different, and it does not allow us to expand in the greatest ways we can. But just the fact that it's space at this point is enough to get us there.
Shamara, Eng, Elliot, Dorian, Julie, thank you all so much for being present, for bringing your passionate intensities to this conversation. I began with burnout. Maybe we're ending in nihilism. But I'm not afraid of nihilism because ex nihilo creatio. Please, thank you all.